Hi, it's Jennifer from CPAT with part 2 of the System Course Conversion Training. In this video, I'm going to show you how to storyboard your lesson content. Before we begin, let's do a quick review of what we covered in part 1 of the training. So if you recall, we are breaking down the FCOM content into chapters, modules, and lessons. By now, you have selected a module to work on, you have reviewed the information in the FCOM for the module, and you have organized that content into lessons. You have also identified what the learner should be able to do by the time they have completed the lesson. Or, in other words, you have identified the learning objectives for each lesson. Now, it is time to storyboard the content for each lesson. First, I want to make sure that we are all clear on what the purpose of the storyboard is. You are probably familiar with storyboards because they're used in all kinds of industries to describe what a product should look like and sound like. At CPAT, our storyboards serve the same purpose. They tell the graphics team what the visual support should look like, and they tell the courseware developers how to build the lesson using our authoring tool called Invent. Notice that we use Microsoft PowerPoint to do our storyboards. What you see here is an example of an instructional designer's storyboard. If you notice, the page is very, very busy. There are graphic instructions, there are reference images, there are action instructions, and there are 3 types of narration. This is the type of storyboard that only the instructional designer uses. You, the SME, get to work on a much simpler version of the storyboard, at least initially. So this is what the SME storyboard looks like, and you can see that it is a much more trimmed down version. And the reason that we use PowerPoint as opposed to a Word document to storyboard is that it provides a really easy way to add reference images, which are very, very important. And it also helps you organize your content into short chunks of information. So now that you have an idea of what the storyboard looks like, let's get into how to create your initial storyboard. The first page of your storyboard is called the Lesson Specifics page. This is where you're going to provide some basic information about the lesson. You're going to need to fill in the table. First, you identify the aircraft, you identify the chapter of the systems that you're working on, the module that it's in, and which particular lesson this is. You'll also want to identify the aircraft's FMS and engine type. Add your name where it says SME, and where it says source material, let us know what FCOM you were using or any other resource that you're using to create this lesson. The next page is called the reference materials page. This is where you are going to list any extra resources or reference material you want the student to have in addition to that lesson content. So here you can include anything from PDFs, images, videos, or links to an external source. So in this example, the SME is going to have a hydraulic system schematic available for the whole lesson. In the box at the left, right up here, the SME gives the reference item a name and he indicates where it came from. And he also lets us know if it's going to be used for the whole lesson or only on specific pages. And when you're selecting reference materials, just be mindful of the file sizes. You don't want to include a really long video or a big chunk of the FCOM because those types of files will take up way too much of our available bandwidth. So the lesson specifics page and the reference material pages are for basic information. So now let's get into the instructional content pages and how you're going to use those to organize your content. You're going to begin by writing the instructional content under the blue slide area where it says narration. In this example, the page content is about where the IDG controls are located. And before we move on to those other fields that you see around that narration field, I want to emphasize something very important about the narration itself and organizing your content. You want to be sure to limit the content on each page to one concept and one learning objective only. You may need to spread the information for a single learning objective across several pages, but you cannot address more than one concept and one learning objective per page. For example, if you were working on a lesson about the engine bleed air valves, each of those learning objectives must be discussed on a separate page. However, you can, and probably will, take more than one page to discuss a single learning objective. So in this example, the SME is describing the purpose of the engine bleed air valves. This is the only concept and the only objective he will include on this page. The SME uses another page to describe the next concept that's related to that same learning objective. Another important part of the storyboard are reference images, or sometimes they're called graphics. So let's discuss those next. In a lesson, the images are just as important as the narration itself. We follow a say it, see it rule, meaning whatever you say in the text needs to be visually represented on the page. We put the reference images on the slide itself. And to the left is a box where you're going to provide some information about the image, but we're going to talk about that in just a second. The images we use on the storyboard are called reference images. These will be turned into beautiful web-optimized graphics by our amazing graphic team, and they're going to be what's used in the lesson. And they're also added to the asset library for anybody else to use. So just know that the reference images that you use on the storyboard can look really not so great, and they can be all marked up and they can have weird lines and everything on them. That's okay, because that's not the graphic that's going to appear in the developed lesson. The graphics team is going to turn it into something really nice. So in this example, the narration is talking about 3 different panels that control lighting in the cockpit. So following our see it, say it rule, we're going to show all 3 panels. Here, the narration describes how the main panel controller turns the panel lights on or off, and also how it controls their brightness. So we need to see not only the controller, which is right up here, but we're going to need to see what that main panel looks like with the lights off, and what it looks like when the lights are turned on bright. So now let's go back to that box that I mentioned that's on the left. This is where you need to provide important information about the images that you want to use. First, you need to give the image a meaningful name. This will become the file name of the rendered graphic also, so it needs to be descriptive but not too long. So in this example, the name of the graphic is, appropriately, bus switching panel. Next, you're going to want to indicate where the reference image comes from. If it's from a manual, please include the page number. Some reference images you're going to get from the internet, or you can also snip them from YouTube videos. If that's the case, you just want to say YouTube or internet and then provide a link to the source. Then use bullet points to describe any changes you want the graphics team to make to the reference image when they turn it into the final graphic. Notice here that the graphics team, when they render the graphic, they're going to extinguish all the amber lights and all the blue lights, and they're also going to show the Gen 1 and Gen 2 switches in the on position. Notice that here the page has 3 graphics, and they're labeled A, B, and C. So on that graphic information box on the left, we also label each graphic, or we identify each graphic as A, B, or C. So to recap, your instructional designer will write the formal instructions. What you need to do is make sure that you give each image a meaningful name, tell us where the image came from, and describe what the image should look like. So far, we've covered quite a bit of information and we are almost finished, but we need to go over just a couple of last few things that you're going to need to take care of on that storyboard. So underneath the blue slide where you put your reference images is a space for you to add a bunch of information. We've already discussed the narration field. Above it is a field where you're going to identify the learning objective for the page. Under that, you want to indicate where the content came from in the manual. And then below the narration is an area where you can explain to the instructional designer what you want to see happen on the page, if anything at all. So let's take a look at each of these three things in a little bit more detail. The first field up there is the learning objective field. Just remember there can be only one learning objective per page. Next, you want to write the FCOM page where the content came from. It's really helpful if you use that single page out of total pages format. And finally, if you want the student to do something such as select a control, or if you want the graphics to do something like disappear at a certain time, you can explain that in this field here. If you don't have any instructions, that's okay too, because your instructional designer will be able to come up with something to make your page pretty snazzy. So at this point, it might be helpful to look at how it all comes together by looking at a few pages from an example SME storyboard. This is the lesson specifics page for from one of our storyboards. Notice that the SME has completed all of the fields. The next page, if you recall, is the reference material page. Here, the SME has included a lights location diagram as a reference image, and he wants that to be available for the whole lesson. So he added that instruction right there. He indicated where the source came from right there, and he gave the image a name, lights location diagram. Notice also that this image is black and white. It's just an illustration. When we do our graphics, we really try to avoid using black and white images. So the SME indicated that he wants color added to it. And then over here, he provided a color reference for this graphic. You are going to want to do that too. So if you ever have a black and white illustration, you're going to need to find a color reference for it. It usually comes from the internet or something. A lot of times if a panel is in black and white, you need to find a color reference for the panel. If lights are on or lights are off, or there's a special indicator, find a color reference so we know what it's supposed to look like. We use the label color reference here to indicate to the graphics team so everybody is sure that this is not going to be a graphic in and of itself. It's just simply a reference for this one. We also know that this is not a graphic because if it were, there would be two graphics. This one would be labeled A and this one would be labeled B. This is the first content page. Notice that it uses the same graphic as used for the reference materials. So up here in this little information box, he reiterated the name of the graphic, but he just said used previously instead of stating the FCOM page because we've already identified where it comes from. So it's perfectly acceptable to say used previously if you're repeating a graphic. You do however, want to make sure that you repeat the name. The SME has filled out all of the fields down here. We've got our lesson objective, where the content came from. We've got a nice one concept sentence over here. And then the SME has indicated that he wants to see each of these labels pop up as they're mentioned in the narration. And that is a really nice instructional strategy to help the learner focus their attention. This is the second content page. We've got 3 graphics because that is what is mentioned down here in the narration. They're all labeled A, B, and C. We've got our A, B, and C over here, just like we need to. All of the graphics have a name, they all have a source, that's great, and there's some instructions. Notice that B and C, these graphics came from a manual and they've got like these circled numbers and lines over here. We definitely don't want those in our rendered graphics, so the SME asked that those be taken out. If you don't remember to do that, don't worry about it. That is kind of a standard for us. So your instructional designer, when they go to write the formal graphic instructions, they'll make sure that they say to remove those kinds of items, and they'll remove the white background as well. Again, we've got, it's the same learning objective, but even though it's the same one as the previous page, he made sure to restate it on here. We've got the source, we've got the narration, and we've got some instructions for the instructional designer. I just want to take a look at one final page before we finish this up. This is our third content page. We've got a different learning objective here, but otherwise everything is the same. Everything is identified, everything looks good. Down here in the instruction, the SME has indicated that he wants to see an interaction where the student clicks on this controller and he turns the lights, they're off here, and he wants to turn the lights from off to bright. So the instructional designer will put that into the proper format for him. And that is how you storyboard your lesson. So that was a lot of information. I will make this PowerPoint available to you to use as a reference, and your instructional designer will provide you with your storyboard template as soon as you're ready for it. Please remember that your instructional designer is here to help you, so don't be shy about reaching out to them.